Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heathen Talk episode 18 or 19 or one of those numbers. I lost track because I'm bad at things.
20.
20?
Yes.
Apparently it's episode 20. I learn something new every day. So, as usual, we want to invite you to be involved in the conversation. If you're listening live and you're not in the IRC, please head over to the IRC link that is in the video description or on the Facebook or on the subreddit. We put it everywhere. If you want your awesome Heathen Talk t-shirt, you can head over to teechip.com/Heathen Talk and get the t-shirt. I believe Heathen Talk mug is the coffee mug, and then there's also a link for ladies' shirt and children's shirts, I believe.
Hey, because people want to know, Josh, that's the t-shirt right there. Mine finally came in, so it's awesome.
And surprisingly, it's very comfortable. I've had some shoddy luck with online t-shirt stuff. I really like this one.
Well, I don't know if it's just the way they do it at T-Chip or like sometimes or always, but mine's printed on Fruit of the Loom, so it's a decent t-shirt.
There you go. If you are interested in donating to the show, you can go to patreon.com/heathentalk. We are working on getting, we're working on getting our patrons their audio copies of the Havamal and looking to start other projects there as well. And the audio Havamal is, I think, $2. That's all it costs to get your copy of it. And please, like this video, helps us share it. Give us a rating on iTunes. Give us a like on whatever you're listening to us on in podcast form. And tell us what you think. Send us a message on Facebook or comment on the post on the subreddit. We don't really read our YouTube comments because we're lazy.
And YouTube comments are vile and awful, and they sap your soul. So we'll move on.
You really got to choose your platform, you know.
So if you guys are watching live, you can see that there is a particular face missing from our lineup. Lauren was busy with real-life stuff like schoolwork and being a productive human being and was unable to make it, so we have Toby filling in for her tonight. Torin is with us. He's back from the Savage Lands. And we have two guests.
So,
tell us about our guests there, Toby.
Yeah. So today we have with us Samuel Flegal and Brian Marshall. Sam has been a freelance illustrator since 2009. His art is described as stylized realism, portraying fantastical things in a graphic manner, but with an eye towards real life. Sam's preferred medium is oil paint. In his personal work, he depicts scenes from the Norse lore. Sam's a fantastic artist, an amazing heathen, and I'm really pleased that you joined us for the show tonight. Thank you for joining.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm excited. I've only listened through about episode 9 or 10, but I'm a fan of the show, so it's cool.
Awesome. Also, we have my personal friend, Brian Marshall. Brian is the artist, horn wrangler, shipper, and head bottle washer of Where the Gods Live Horns and Jewelry. He is a 20-year heathen and sculptor specializing in horn and bone. Through his shop Where the Gods Live and regional fairs in Georgia, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Tennessee, he crafts and sells drinking and blowing horns, cups, and other artwork. He has been working independently making art since 2012, and he also carved my personal horn.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Pick an earlier time for the East Coast next time, maybe, but other than that, it's awesome.
I personally know you stay up till 3 on most nights.
Yeah. It's true.
We do tend to run things on a civilized time.
Yes.
So.
Cascadian time.
Well, I'm fond of the Cascades, so we'll call it good.
There you go. So we do have a tradition of doing a toast before every episode, and I think tonight's toast is kind of special.
It is. Most people know of our toast where we try to find somebody influential within the heathen community modernly, somebody who's doing something important to toast, and that's a really good cause, but occasionally, as you've noted in episodes before, we will break away from that if we see a good reason, and, well, today's a fantastic reason for it. Most of you out there in the American listening audience know that this is Veterans Day, and anybody we may or may not have that listen to us in Europe might know it as Armistice Day. This is a day where we honor the veterans of our various services. And I'm pretty sure that most people at some point in their lives know one, and most people have definitely been benefited by one. Not everybody always agrees with the wars that we fight, but we should at least agree that the people who fight them are good and honorable men who are doing their damnedest to make sure that their people and their tribe are safe. To borrow a quote from a friend of mine earlier, who was speaking about the 4 generations of his family that have served, he said, "Right, wrong, or indifferent, service isn't about self. It's about tribe, and I'm proud to have shared the blood, sweat, and tears with the best, bar none." And I think that can be said by every serviceman or woman about the people they've served with. And I hope that tonight we can raise our glasses to those servicemen and women, be they heathen or not. They fight for our various tribes. So here's to our veterans.
Hail.
Hail.
Hell.
So, as our guest pointed out to us in the pre-show, we have another tradition that follows our toast, where we go around and brag about what we're drinking. So I'm going to let our guests start here. Brian, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking White Rascal by Avery. It's out of Colorado. It's a Belgian-style wit beer.
It's a good one.
All right. Sam, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking a local Nashville beer made by Yazoo. It's their fall lager.
Taryn, it's your turn.
Well, I'm drinking, once again, one of the most Cascadian beers you can possibly drink because it was made in Cascadia by a Cascadian with Cascadian ingredients. This is the latest out of my fermenters. This is Doppelmarzen, and it's the best Doppelmarzen you've ever had.
How many double Marzens have you had? Honestly?
Exactly. I mean, come on. There really aren't very many out there.
So
Toby, how long do you think before they start a drinking game where somebody takes a shot every time one of us says Cascadia?
I've already heard it, but it wasn't drinking; it was shooting.
Oh.
Are they still alive?
But their neighbors are running for the hills. I am drinking a Widmer Brothers Bar seasonal ale. It's a red ale. It's fantastic. It's crisp and it's clean, and that's out of Portland.
Very nice.
I am drinking one of my my go-tos. It's Lights Out Stout by Worthy Brewing out of Bend, Oregon, because the best beer in the world is brewed in Oregon.
I think that's all they do in Bend is brew beer and
Ski. There's lots of skiing.
I can see that. But there's nothing for hours in any direction.
That's true. That's true.
Okay. So so let's get started. So today we're talking about art, heathenry, and the mix of the two. In fact, both of our guests are professional artists, and both of our guests are experienced heathens with a unique and specific style and something to say, not only about art, but about heathenry. Both artists have, in the past, and are currently working on art series that are profoundly influenced by myth and legend and by modern heathen themes. So I'd like to invite Sam to talk a little bit about his painting series, Nordic Myth. And I forget the title of the second one, even though I was watching them being bashing around.
No worries. So at first, I don't know if I'd consider myself an experienced heathenry. I'm certainly experiencing heathenry, but I do feel the need to say, like, I've only been at this thing a couple years, or I only found it a couple years. So
Sam?
Yeah.
Shut up and take the compliment.
Okay. For my personal series, I call it Fateful Signs, which comes from the Bellows version of the Hollow of them all that says, "Runes shalt you find and fateful signs," and it's kind of where I pulled it out. But yeah, at this point, I've got, man, I think 12 to 15 pieces, all done based on Norse lore. You know, the themes. I started with Odin, and I've just sort of worked my way through different pieces. The first, actually, the first official Norse piece I ever did was a piece about Loki that I never finished. But the first one in the series that was actually finished was Odin. It's actually the one you can kind of see on the banner right behind me, which you may or may not have seen as various memes on the internet because people use it all the time. Which I always get asked if that bothers me, and as long as people aren't selling it, I mean, it doesn't bother me. And I also feel it's kind of appropriate that the Gray Wanderer is wandering around the internet just as much as he wanders everywhere else. So, yeah. So for me, man, I don't know if I'll say anything more than that. I guess if you have questions, I can go for there. But I like Norse mythology. It's a big part of, obviously, my spiritual self, and it's a big part of the same statement I want to make with my personal art.
Mm-hmm. Well, cool. Well, thank you, Sam. Brian also has a series that he's been working on for a couple of years, and again, I was extremely fortunate to see it both in its original form and as it's grown and matured. So, Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about your horn project?
Sure. I guess for the last couple of years now, I've been working on basically creating God mask horns. So taking the time to carve on a horn different pieces and parts, both of the facets of the gods and goddesses, but also, you know, different pieces of their story. You know, the whole project basically came about dedicating to honoring the gods and goddesses individually, kind of trying to take a minute for myself because it's a meditative process almost. Because I have to spend a lot of time researching, reading, and then actually kind of getting into the bones of what's going to go on to the piece of art. I mean, that's the bones of it. It's, you know, one horn per god and goddess is where I'm headed. So far, the series has got the first one that I ever did was a Thor. Although I have revisited Thor recently again, but Thor. Then I did Odin, Tyr, and Uller. I finished Uller last year, right before Yule. I do a feast out here called the Feast of Uller every year, and that's the horn that's now part of that feast forever.
It's very cool. It's interesting to being familiar with both of your art styles. Brian has a very iconic or iconographic style, whereas Sam is deeply like realistic in his depictions. And do either of you feel, or either want to comment on how your choice of how you express yourself stylistically is influenced by how you view your religious life?
Good question. I mean, from a personal standpoint, for me anyway, the reason that I work in iconography, I guess, is because, well, for one, I leave the illustrative and the talented work to people who are more talented, like Sam. I like to stick to I don't know, simple and strong, I guess, is the way that I like to think about it. And I think maybe that does, in kind of a bizarre way, sum up my heathenry as a whole, is, you know, simple and strong, you know, nothing too complicated. Let's keep it really simple. And I mean, I really enjoy the old motifs and the old style of art that came from Scandinavia specifically, you know, things like urn style knotwork and stuff like that. It's really, I guess, the type of art that speaks to me when I saw it, so I wanted to create something that spoke in the same sort of way.
So to talk about style, I got to go outside of heathenry. My background is actually I'm an illustrator for games, specifically tabletop games like Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40K. I've worked on Legend of the Five Rings, and so for me, the art originally comes out of the desire to work in games. I mean, I played just tons of Dungeons and Dragons when I was in high school, and so that kind of stuff. So I approached illustration thinking of like Brahms' work, obviously Frank Frazetta. You know, I mean the big names. I don't nothing surprising there, at least if you follow fantasy art at all. And so for me, where I came to doing my series Fateful Signs was basically I ran out of work, and so as a freelancer, I don't know how many of you are freelancers, but basically you got work booked up, and there's a point where I hit my stride early in my career, and I just had work for a couple of years, and I hit this 1 month where I didn't have any work, and I really struggled with what to do in that time, and that eventually led to me starting this series, which as my career has gone on, it's overtaken to where now I actually get commissioned to do work for various heathen kindreds, pagan circles, the people who want pieces that are in this theme. Or if I don't, I do one for myself, and I actually am making as much money, or in many cases more, off of the personal work now. So that's been a transition. Speaking stylistically, though, my favorite quote on style is from Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy, who says that style is all the things you do wrong and can't figure out why. And so, like, for me, I actually wish, like, I'm trying to paint like Brahm, but I can only paint like Sam Flegal. Similar, like, you know, Rembrandt really wished that he was Velázquez. And so I think most artists have these influences that they filter in. Other comic books are another big influence for me. I was big into, like, Spawn, Todd McFarlane when I was young. And occasionally I see those things come out in the art, but it's almost like, you know, I try to direct it a certain way, and this is just what happens. So as far as how Heathenly impacts me stylistically, I'd say that it doesn't impact my style much at all, but it does impact my content and what I'm trying to communicate a great deal.
Okay. Well, that begs the question, and sorry for hogging the host spot, but what are you trying to communicate? Like,
so I mean that varies from piece to piece. So one of my mentors taught me pretty early on that if you don't say anything, or if you don't try to communicate anything with your art, that's exactly what your audience is going to see, is nothing. But if you approach it from an emotional standpoint, so for me, you know, like a painting on Thor, which I have not done yet. It's easier to talk about stuff I haven't done. It's more trying to wrap my head around what aspect of Thor is this painting about, because you can't do one painting that encompasses the entire spiritual being that is Thor, even so much as like what I understand Thor to be, and then it's, you know, what do I want to say about Thor. I guess a good example would be I did a piece on the binding of Loki, and I wanted to communicate just how brutal the situation was, but to contrast that brutality with the sadness that Sigyn feels as she looks on. So I definitely approach those sorts of things from the beginning and I'll generate words like, you know, what do I think is brutal? Why is it brutal? You know, just all those types of things to try and get through. So I mean, it's different. Every piece communicates a different thing. Yeah.
Oh, cool. No, I mean, definitely gives us an insight into your approach to what you're trying to do, and I appreciate that. And actually, it's an interesting thing you brought up the business of art, because that was something that we wanted to touch on a little bit later. So I
have a question for Brian. I know you do your horn series. Does the fact that heathens tend to use horns in ritual add any gravity to what you're putting onto them, or is it always just a heavy experience for you?
I mean, yeah, I mean, it definitely adds to it depending on what somebody wants to do with it. You know, if it's, I mean, admittedly, the heaviest work that I've done thus far has been stuff that came like right out of my own, you know, I guess, necessity, like things that I just felt like I needed to do. Um, but the content makes a huge difference because I mean I'm sure it's the same for Sam. Whatever you're working on, you got to sit with it for a long time. You know, even if it's just the hours you spend actually creating it. So I mean, it's
Yeah, me and Brian have often talked about how it's a meditative ritual to just create the thing.
absolutely true. Yeah, absolutely true. So I mean, it is heavy duty depending on what it is you're working on. Um, you know, I don't. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does.
So I mean, there's definitely more gravity depending on what people want on their horns. I mean, don't get me wrong, I get a lot of stupid requests as well, but for the stuff that I really enjoy, the stuff that's really pertinent to this particular conversation, horn is funky stuff to work with, but it's even funkier when the subject matter is serious business.
That reminds me an awful lot of a stoneworker that I know that cracked, I think, 4 slabs of stone trying to depict Odin before one of them decided it was okay. And he's never had a failure rate like that before or since.
No, absolutely, absolutely true. You know what I mean? It's fortunately, I don't. You know, I also don't have much of a failure rate as far as horns go, as in terms of like my wastage. But there's more than a few times that I start working on something and it's like, well, shit, that's not it. It's gonna have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
Sam usually hears about those conversations at midnight to 2 a.m. when I'm like, dude, what's going on here, man? This is not working for me. What the hell am I doing wrong?
And I definitely had some failures early on in my career, but almost every aspect of the early stages of my process exists to prevent the failure at a later stage. Because you know, it's one thing to screw up a sketch, it's another to screw up an oil painting you've got 160 hours in.
Truth.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Not with oil, but
with anything. Yeah, with
I'll be
anything.
honest,
steel.
I don't know that feeling.
The better the plan, the less likely you are to screw it up.
But you know, there are just some mediums you work with where you get to a point where there's no more room for error.
Well,
That's true.
oil painting is particularly forgiving in that respect because you can always go opaque, you can always cover it up, add just more layers, and if you really screwed it up, you can also just wipe it out with a rag and go back to what's underneath. So.
I think I probably sympathize more with Brian working with the horn. I work with steel, and once the material is gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
There's no putting it back.
Yeah. No, I don't have I got to use my eraser when I'm doing my sketch because I can't use it when I'm carving.
Yeah, the definition of an additive medium versus a subtractive one.
Uh-huh.
So one thing Brian said early on that I want to ask him about, he talked about revisiting Thor. I'm curious, kind of what brought about that, and what's that process looking like for you?
Well, it was really weird to be honest with you because I mean I did, of course I did the Thor Protector of Ships in August of 2013, which I still have the horn. That's my personal horn. I've got it here, and you know it was a huge thing to finish. Which involved borderline obsession. All right, so it wasn't really borderline; it was way past obsession to get this thing done. And it was also the first God horn that I ever did. But for some reason, this past summer, I was just sitting around and thinking about the imagery. You know, I mean, Thor's the chariot drawn by the goats. You know, you've got Tangrisner and Tanganostr. You know, the Whaler and the Gnasher. And I kept thinking about those big like ibex style horns rather than goat horns because you see it like in a mountain goat, and I'm thinking, why in the world would a god be pulled around by a couple of dinky little mountain goats when you've got these huge ibex creatures that are also goats? Anyway, long story short, I kept thinking about those ibex horns curling up, making the head of the hammer, and then next thing I know, I'm like, you need to do this again, man, because it's not all done yet. And next thing I know, there's here comes a god mask and a hammer all in one piece, which was a really strange. And for me, the art of that one, like the actual drawing portion of it, came together way faster than it usually does. That usually takes a long time, seems like, but that one was quick.
Oh, sorry, Josh. I just wanted to ask Sam a question real quick. What was the inspiration for the picture behind you that unintentionally, artfully has your website framed at eye level?
So it's actually my banner. I make a good chunk of my business going to conventions, and I also host my own web show called One Fantastic Week, where I interview illustrators in the fantasy market. So I'm very familiar with Hangouts and knew exactly what I was in for. So I just threw up all my gear that I would normally do for my show, which is why it conveniently has my name and website on it. But the painting of Odin is a piece I wanted to do for a while. I call it Odin's Secrets. So it's Odin holding Mimir's head with both of his ravens coming in as like the different ways Odin gains knowledge both of our world and of the other world. And when I started the piece, I was actually not heathen. I actually hadn't ever heard of heathenry. I'd done a tattoo show, where I'd done the badge art, and I did a version of Fenris as a werewolf holding Odin's head in the badge art. And I worked a whole lot of things like Thor's hammer and some various icons that, if you guys saw the paintings as heathens, you'd be like, oh, I know what that is, oh, I know what that is, into it. And so this guy walks up to my table and just starts saying, like, man, are you Alcatraz, like all this stuff? And I like, man, I don't know what you're talking about. And he thinks I'm crazy, like, why would you know all this stuff about Norse mythology and not know about Alcatraz? And so we talked for a little bit. He says, well, just look it up. And so I did look it up, and I researched, and I kept coming back to it, trying to figure out more. And so I was in that phase when I started this piece, and man, I started having dreams around that time. Man, this might go to like Wuji place. I don't know how comfortable we all are with that, but I mean, I started having dreams, meditative work that I was doing at the time. I was particularly interested in finding my personal spirit guide, be it an animal or a person, and I was reading lots of blogs about how one goes about that. For me, it involved a candle and alcohol, and that was about it. And yeah, I had this experience where I thought I was visited by Odin, but I don't think I actually was. I actually think it was my personal spirit guide, like in a guise that I would understand, which led me to just like have to paint this piece to better understand what it was that I was seeing. And so yeah, I guess that's where that came from. And then by the time I finished the piece, I both had the answer to both problems, I guess. Like, I'd finished the painting, and at the time, it was one of the best paintings I'd ever done. And it actually surpasses some of the work I did immediately after it as well. And I've had a lot of people tell me that it is my favorite piece that I've done of theirs. And I think it's because I talk about this with illustrators a lot, where a lot of times skill doesn't matter. Like, there's many accounts where painters that are amateurs or not as good as the people winning awards in our field create a piece that's just so personal to them that emotion carries through. And what I think people actually seek out in art is truth. Because in our adult lives, we basically just lie to each other all the time. We also lie to ourselves a whole lot. And so I mean, simple things like, how do I look in this dress? Or, hey, how you doing? Most people answer those questions with, oh, I'm fine, even if, your mother's in a coma, or, you're dealing with all this terrible shit, because you're going around dealing with other adults who are dealing with their own problems, and we don't want to bother them. So we create all these quick little lies just to get through day to day. But when we see a piece of art, be that a carving, a painting, a song, So art in the big A, broad sense. When we latch onto that little bit of truth, it resonates with us in a way that most things don't. And as an artist, that's very much what I try to capture with my personal work is those personal truths. So for me, that's what that painting is that truth of discovery. As I researched heathenry as well, it also seemed really appropriate. I've heard so many stories where people come to Odin first or feel like Odin found them and brought them in, even if they don't have a particularly close relationship with Odin after that point. Yeah, I guess in a roundabout way, I guess that answers the question.
It's a funny story about that painting. I got an echo. Okay. Before I ever met Sam, I met a gentleman by the name of Scott. Through a mutual friend, we were on we went to a wedding together. Ended up sharing a cabin on the cruise. A couple of weeks later, he posts this beautiful picture of that painting and says, "Hey, I was the model for this." And then I'd have to say less than a year later, I go to my buddy Brian's house, and there's the original piece sitting in Brian's dining room, and I was just like, it was a moment of serendipity. So I get to share my little woo.
Careful, I didn't think it was that kind of show.
It isn't.
I say that's about 3 or 4 episodes worth of woo right there, at least.
It's hard to. Art's one of those things that when it's working really well, it feels very much like an other is creating it, and it's because at a biological level, when you're creating art the right way, your subconscious is doing most of it, and our subconscious is not well detained by what we would call our physical selves. And so that's where like the idea of the muse even comes from, is it's our attempt to explain this wider sense of self that most people don't ever even have to come to grips with. Most of us exist in jobs and day-to-day affairs where the subconscious happens when we sleep, and that's all we need. Thank you very much. And as an artist, I'm constantly in a place where I have to self-evaluate both subconscious and conscience to understand, why do I want to paint this? Because if I can figure it out and I can harken back to that while I'm creating the work, other people, they're going to get it. They may not express it in those ways that I'm expressing it, but to me it's very much a part of the craft of making art.
Well, on a really similar note, to kind of continue in this vein a bit, the question I have for both of you, that I guess sort of comes through my own experiences with art and the ways that I make it. Do you ever find yourself suddenly having created something without having that intervening time? I guess it's a really hard question to frame. But those moments where you just are creating and not really consciously doing anything with your piece.
For me, it's very much at the beginning of the sketch phase. I try to not think too hard about what I'm sketching. If I listen to music, it has to be non-verbal, only instrumental stuff, or occasionally chant is fine, particularly if it's in another language. So yes, at the beginning, as I'm just sketching and trying to find an image, that's very much a part of a process, is just let what happens. The other stuff is more as in the finishing process. Brian, what about you?
Yeah, are you ever just going at the horn with your tools, and you look down and you see design elements you weren't even really thinking consciously about when you put them on the horn?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. There's definitely a lot of stuff that's not necessarily in the plan, and there's a lot of the plan that changes as the carving's happening. I did a horn not long ago that was kind of a weird mixture of Norse mythology and actually Greek mythology, where I wanted to take something that was a totally Greek piece of mythology, a Hydra, as an image, and I wanted to turn it into something Norse. just for the fun of I don't know why the hell I did it. I did it anyway though. And but you know, I mean that horn. I mean ultimately there's no drawing. There's no anything for it. It just kind of happened. You know, I mean I took a pen and did some sketching and stuff like that on the horn itself, but there's no paper involved or anything like that. And the next thing I know, it's just this horn came out of it. So there's definitely a lot of late nights where I don't really necessarily make all the decisions involved. You just kind of let it happen.
I know we've talked, Brian, about some of your pieces, particularly with the God mask horns, where you'll go back and forth with me in the sketch phase. I mean, it seems like sometimes for like a whole month or more until you sit down to do it. But then when you do it, the mask is definitely there, but all the details around it, you always just said to me like you see them in the horn during the process.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I suck at that kind of thing with a pencil and a piece of paper. It's just not my. I don't know. I'm not any good at it. But when I'm looking at a horn, the shapes involved, the texture, the sound the horn makes when I'm working on it. You know, I mean, all that stuff influences the way that I finish everything out. The small details are going to take place as the carving happens. I can't visualize them on that flat surface of an on 8.5 by 11 or whatever the hell, you know what I mean? But I can once I see it in 3 dimensions.
I sympathize with that so much. I think it's a 3-dimensional versus 2-dimensional art thing right there.
Well, I was going to say there's one thing that happens in paint once you get very in tune, particularly after you've made like some of the basic layers of like just simple color choices. The painting does start to talk to you and tell you what it needs to be finished. It's actually one of the most jarring things about being forced to stop a personal piece because I get a lot of client work is sometimes when I come back to a piece after setting it aside for even just a week or a few days, you lose the zen of the painting talking to you, and you have to find it again, and sometimes that process is incredibly painful.
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
So, as listeners to the show know, we have a particular obsession with regional heathenry on the show. And I was curious, when you take a commission piece or you do something for a specific kindred or what have you, do you see any variations in what they're requesting based on where they're located?
For me, the variation isn't so much on location. Well, I mean, maybe it is. I don't know. Brian, you got specific examples of that?
Well, I mean, I've done some. You know, it's interesting. About the only thing I can reference specifically. Let's see here. I did a kindred horn. I've done a couple kindred horns for some kindreds in Wisconsin, which, you know, it's hard to pinpoint any particular regional variation there. I mean, all of them. All the kindreds, for whatever reason, I mean, they've always got an animal theme going on, or they always have something animal related they want to do. There's usually some specific words that, you know, I mean, whatever their kindred name is, or something like this. I will say this: so far, it's either been Illinois or the Northeast is where I've had to deal with people who, quote unquote, heathens that I don't make horns for. That the work has come from. I don't get them out of the West. I haven't gotten them out of the South. The people that we ignore, by and large, if we can help it, the Northeast and Illinois, as far as regional variations are concerned.
That's valuable information, actually.
Not at all what I expected out of that question.
For me, I have had individuals purchase paintings, original paintings and drawings that I finished for me. And that's more. I mean, it's not really hard to figure out. Like I did a tier piece. A tiersman bought it. You know, obviously it spoke to him on a level probably even beyond what it spoke to me as I was creating it. So that sort of thing, I haven't found any regional bias on. But I did do a painting for the Newark Odinist Temple in the United Kingdom, and they've taken a 16th century abbey and turned it into a heathen temple, which I love. I like the idea of like taking it back. But their piece they commissioned was super lore heavy, and I'd say my work, I do get inspiration from the lore specifically, but I often allow things to go beyond that and start thinking in terms of how do I feel about something. What are some examples from heathens I know that have a personal relationship with the god or goddess I'm working on, and how do they have any UPG that they lean towards, and is there a way that I can represent that in the piece? And they wanted none of that. They wanted it to be it was Frigg was the piece I was doing, and they had wanted her to look a certain way, and they had a very specific scene in mind. And in a way, it was more. I'm trying to think. They wanted a piece that was more meditative, where I wasn't answering a lot of the questions for the viewer, so they could just look at it, tell it was Frigg, and then draw their own conclusions. I've also done some pieces for Wiccan groups who use Norse imagery in their work, and as I'm sure all of you can imagine, that requires a lot of conversation on my part to kind of understand what they're working from, because Wiccan's one of those religions that is, well, I mean, maybe even more so than heathenry, where it's just all over the place.
So let's talk a little bit about the business of art. Where am I getting that? Sorry about that. Let's talk a little bit about the business of art, because I am pleased that the two of you have very different approaches. Sam, you work commission freelance, and you do your personal pieces, but I imagine that a lot of your stuff is, or at least in the past you've mentioned, has been commissions, and few of it is on spec, whereas Brian is more of a craftsman, building these physical products that he then sells at the fairs or through his website. Can you talk a little bit about how that informs your decisions to approach a piece, or how the business, like, how am I going to sell this? How am I going to make money out of this? Because both of you make a living by doing this stuff, and so there's definitely some business decisions that have to occur and have to inform what you're choosing.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I think about a lot. I actually just ran a workshop in Nashville last weekend that was all about the business of art, where we focused very much on all this stuff. So I can tell you pretty accurately that 60% of my business comes from conventions and the sale of original paintings at those conventions. The thing I'm finding is that while the client work was a segue into many things, what's actually selling is my personal work, both as prints and as original paintings. And so what's weird is, I guess when I started out in the business, I thought that the client work and then the sale of original client work would lead me to financial success. But what I'm actually finding is that doing what I want to do with my voice, my personal truth, is what other people latch onto and want to buy, both the originals and prints. And I get asked a lot of times, when's the next, Fateful Signs piece coming out? Because I've had to slow down a little bit on that stuff recently. So it does influence me a lot when I start thinking, like, wow, what people want is for me to do me, and get it more into my own head and experiences, which is both really exciting, but then it can be a little bit intimidating too, because in a lot of ways it's a lot easier when you just get a brief that says we need an orc holding a Space Marine's severed head. I know exactly what to do in that situation, but when you can do anything to interpret whichever story I pick to interpret, there's an intimidating aspect there. So that's sort of the direction my business is going currently.
Ask me the question again.
So
Please.
the question was, and I sort of contrasted Sam's approach to art with your approach to art. Sam, he's doing paintings, he's doing commission work, he's doing freelance work, and now he's moving into a situation where he's doing his own stuff and finding that there's a market for that. In contrast, the work that you're doing has a certain physicality to it. These are drinking vessels. These are pieces that you need a stock for. You need to have multiple items to sell at these fairs.
Sure.
And can how does that piece, just having that particular driver on you to produce a bunch of pieces so that you have inventory to sell, inform what you choose to do and how you choose to go about your art?
That's a good question. For one, having the driver on me, having the I guess the whip at the back, as it were, is a pain in the ass at times. Because it means that and I mean, in that regard, Sam's not in a different position than I'm in that the same reason he's had to back off of Faithful Signs is the same reason that I don't get necessarily to work on the same stuff that I want to all the time either. Is because I get stuck with, all right, the bare bones of it is I have to have this many drinking horns or this many blowing horns or this many, basic pieces. I have to have this much stuff made, and then I can work on the stuff that I really want to work on. But I think in a similar experience, personally anyway, I have found over the last 11 months, since December of last year, that I can't make too much of the big stuff that I really enjoy doing. The god masks, the big hammers. I've done some other kind of crazy, not necessarily even heathen related stuff like a big Cthulhu, stuff like that. But I found over the course of the last 11 months that I can't do too much of it because every time I do one, it goes away, and it goes away in a hurry. So I'm left with the daunting task of how do I maintain the balance between these things have to be made, but from a muse standpoint, I got to get this stuff done because if I don't, I turn into a very cranky son of a bitch in a big hurry.
Yeah, I think one thing Brian and I have talked a lot about is that he wishes there was a horn version of Prince. Because that's the nice thing with the painting is, we both have a big ticket handmade item that we're able to sell. But then I'm also able to I do both limited edition prints that are large on fancy paper and all that stuff, and then I do open edition prints that I sell at conventions. And that's the piece of where Brian and I's business differs, because for him, the closest thing to Prince is that, he might do a horn, like 5 horns with the House Stark on them in order to get ready for Dragon Con. But he's still having to carve each and every one of those again and again and again. Like, how many times do you think you've carved the Thor's hammer on a horn at this point, Brian?
Oh my God, one of the most iconic of all time Thor's hammer is the one with the triquetra right in the neck of the hammer. Oh my God, I've probably carved a couple hundred at this point, maybe more.
And that's the biggest difference is you have some simpler designs that you sell for, like, you have the rates, like you can get a regular horn for 40, but get a design on it and it's 100. But then your fancy horns are going from, I don't know, last I checked it was like right around $800. And so, I mean, that's quite a range, but all of it has to be touched by you in some way. Whereas for me, like, yeah, I have to bag the prints and put my business card in the and that's not my favorite thing to do, but you throw on a movie and you just bag a ton of prints before you go to the con. So
if you're trying to make me mad, it's working.
A second question about the business of heathenry, business of art, and specifically heathen art. The convention scene. Both of you guys are you have your seasons where. Sure. I never see you, or you're in a different city every weekend. And Sam, you've mentioned this before. That we're approached by an Ausatru person because of your art. How have you interacted with the greater heathen population through the convention circuit, through your different fairs, your different cons, that kind of experience?
So I think the simplest story to tell is I did this horror con in Atlanta called what was the name of that thing?
Days of the Dead.
Days of the Dead. How could I forget that? So anyway, and I'm setting up back at this time. Early on in my business, I did zombie portraits as a big part of my business model, and set up, had my zombie portrait signed, and I had just found Heathenry. This was very early after I'd done this Odin piece, and I decided I wanted to start wearing a hammer, and was kind of releasing that into prayer or meditation, depending on how you view those things. That I wanted to find a hammer, and then this dude named Brian Marshall sets up a freaking booth full of horns and carved hammer necklaces across from me, quite specifically across from me. You know, we were at this booth with hundreds of vendors. We could have been anywhere in the hall. I have no doubt that we would have found each other regardless. And yet, you know, bam, there we were. And basically, we just walked up to each other and was like, "Your stuff is cool. We should be friends." And we have been.
That's pretty much exactly what happened.
I'm wearing. I'll hold it up to the camera here. I'm wearing the hammer that Brian carved. This is out of cow bone, and I got it then. And so, yeah, how do conventions influence that? I mean, I encounter. You know, I think it's safe to say that heathenry is counterculture, and conventions are also counterculture, and so you encounter them throughout. And Brian, through the Ren fairs, encounters even more heathens, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, it's since day one, so 4 years worth of that now, and the gambit of them, everything from dudes who've been doing this a long time to people who are brand new to people who have millions of questions about this, that, and the other. Want to know what's a Helm of All, what's a Vegvisir, what is this stuff, and I want to know what book to read, or I want to know what to do this and what to do that and everything else. So I mean, I get tons of questions. I get tons of emails from people actually asking me questions about heathenry in general because of, I don't know, when you start making stuff it's got certain imagery and it's got certain, maybe, I don't know if intention matters in this particular circumstance. I have a enthusiasm for it, shall we say. And as a result of that, I get to talking about stuff, and people, they latch on to that enthusiasm, or they get enthusiastic themselves about it. And so as a result, I get tons of questions and meet tons of people via the convention circuit, the fair circuit, and everything else related to heathenry. And of all stripes and varieties, everything, from people that you make meaningful connections with, like Sam, to people that they can't get away from your table fast enough.
Look, I apologized. I left, and I.
I mean, it's the hardest part, I would say, to be honest with you, from my perspective, in the fair circuit, and also, I mean, the convention circuit to a lesser degree, but the fair circuit is when you carve something that's got a Thor's hammer on it. There are two very, very different types of people who can wander up to your table and start asking questions about it or be curious about it. And like I said, I've kind of touched on it to leave it alone, but there's a certain proportion. I've had to get good at telling them to go away in polite fashion because I don't. That's not my speed at all.
So what I think is funny about this, Brian, not that last thing, but that you're basically a traveling evangelist.
By total freaking accident.
Yeah, and the other thing, I always say this joke, particularly when my mother's around. My mom's a Methodist minister, and she always wished I was a religious painter, and I can tell her that now I am. And it's that same sort of a thing where it's like, you put it out there and you find people. I also feel like, I mean, certainly this is my path. You tell me about all the people that just found heathenry brand new and then find you like a week later, and that seems to be a story that happens to you a lot.
Yeah, I get a lot of new folks who start, I don't know, they come across a book or they come across a conversation or something like that, and they wind up with a ton of questions and they wander into my shop. It happens a lot. I've answered a lot of those questions through the years so far. I don't know if it's like I got something painted on my face that I don't know that it's there, but I don't know. At the same time, I kind of enjoy it too because it allows for, all right, I'm not I'm not the the most knowledgeable guy out there by any stretch of the imagination. I don't even know if I'd go so far as to call myself well informed, considering the depth of information there is on the subject. But I know what to not point them to. And I can hand them some good places to start. You know what I mean? And when they start talking about needing to read the Eddas first, and I can go, well, Edda's good, but let's get some knowledge about what that means before we get to that. Get a little context first.
So we do have a question from our chat room, which they need to ask more questions, actually. But this question comes from Zvythrone. He asks, what are the limits on what you'll produce on commission? Like, Brian, would you do a big series of God pulls? Sam, would you do like a mural for a Hoff? Where's your limit? Where do you decide, no, that project's too big?
Brian, you go first.
I'm not totally sure what the limit is yet. I'm in the process now. I'm talking to. There's a really good friend of mine who owns a brewery up in Minnesota. He's a heathen. He's an awesome dude. He makes kick-ass beer. It's all heathen related, as it were. It's called the Hammerheart Brewery, and he and I were talking about me coming up there to carve some God poles actually for him in related to that space. Which would be a really cool project. I don't really know what the limit is. For me, it's all about time, and it's all about when they want something done. Because if they want something done between the months of, April and September, it's impossible.
For me, I would never do a mural. It has nothing to do with where it hangs, but be it used for a Hoff or advertising purposes, I don't paint on walls. That process is actually really different from what I do. Now, if somebody wanted a big-ass oil painting that could hang on a wall space, we can talk. Currently, the largest work I've done is 2 feet by 3 feet, and it's really just comes down to how much of my time are they willing to pay for.
So that kind of leads me to a follow-up question, a question that's very near and dear to my heart as a blacksmith. How often is sticker shock a problem for you guys?
There are for me it's a problem on a regular basis, but it's an interesting one because there's a couple different kinds of people that wander in the booth. There's people who they wander in and they pick something up and they go, how much is this? And I tell them, it's $800, it's $1,000, that's $700, whatever. And they go, whoa, and they put it down basically as though I had just lit it on fire. And then you get some people who wander in and say, well, it's totally worth it, or it's, I like it, and if I had the money, I'd spend it. And then you get the people who wander in the booth and you tell them the price, and they go, okay. And you're just like, all right. And then those are the people who usually, if they want it, they just go, here's the crash. And you're like, oh, well, okay. Thank you. Enjoy that. Have a nice life.
And so for me, it doesn't come up much at all. It's something that I find when early on, it was like kind of uncomfortable to talk prices, but I've done it so much, and just this year, I've sold 16 oil paintings this year, so I'm no longer worried about it. But yeah, the price is displayed very clearly. My smaller pieces that are kind of in like the 8x10 range sell for right around $350, and my larger pieces that are 18x24 sell for right around $2,000. That's the market rate. Every time I sell a piece, I raise my prices slightly so that it shows that it's gaining value over time, which is important for any artist. That someone can feel like they're not just getting a piece that they love and that I enjoyed making, but they're actually making a decent investment as well, which at least with oil painting is something that you can show and document. And so, yeah, it's not a big deal. Occasionally I have people be like, oh my gosh, but I just tell them, like, most of these things took me right around 2 or 3 weeks to create. So that means for me, just like anyone else, I'm spending 40 to 80 hours a week at my day job. My day job is painting. And so how much would you want to get paid at your day job for 2 or 3 weeks worth of work? And the minute you have that conversation, people go, oh yeah, so like, that's a decent job, like, and then they get, and so, but what I find is anybody I have to have that conversation with isn't about to buy an oil painting anyway, so fuck them.
Yeah, well, that's a great attitude.
So I have a related question. Something I've seen come up just in general media recently is people expecting artists to work for free. Do you ever get the guys who come up and be like, well, we're both heathens, so you should just do this for me because that's the way things work?
So I have a really close friend who does Christian religious art, and we both. He also works for Magic the Gathering, which is how we connect. And he has that problem all the time, as I'm sure you can imagine. No, I've never had a heathen come up and be like, brother, let's, let me keep your stuff for free. I mean, I fist bump a lot. And, but often they just buy a print. But no, I've never had. Now I have made gifts of my art to heathens that I think highly of, but I don't. Yeah, I've never had anybody be. I think too because most heathens, even at a basic level, they understand the concept of a gift for a gift, and where our culture is not one built around getting stuff for free.
Yeah, well, I sympathize with that one a little bit. I think the finest piece I ever made was the result of a conversation with somebody where they were holding a competition of sorts that was coming up, and we're talking about the prizes they were going to give away, and he made an off comment that he's like, I really wish I could afford your stuff because I would totally love to give away one of your knives, and that led to me making a knife for him for free because I wanted to.
Right.
And it turned out to be the best piece of work I've ever done in my life, and it hurt me deep in my soul to give it away. But I really enjoyed watching somebody win it. And I'll tell you that there are several places now that I don't pay for drinks as a result of that knife.
Well, because a gift for a gift, right? I mean,
exactly.
That's the thing. And so, yeah, I think it's one of the wonderful things about heathen culture, even in the ways we're all different. Most of the different sects tend to get that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I don't ever get asked. I mean, I get asked for discounts sometimes, but to be honest with you, usually that's not even heathen related. It's just people who they want a deal. I get more of that kind of it'll be good exposure or something like that more from knuckleheaded cosplayers than I do from heathen.
Well, in the knife making world, our biggest problem isn't so much that people want it for free, is that people see work that looks similar in like Bud K going for $30.
Yeah. I can't believe you get the work for exposure thing, Brian. I thought that because in illustration that comes up all the time. I mean, so much so that I just did an illustrators convention right around Halloween. And one of the guys dressed up as Satan with giant horns, holding a sign that says, "Will you work for me for exposure?" And so that's such an inside joke among illustrators. But like the idea that like some cosplayer could wear your horn, and that's gonna like be an advertisement for you that's asinine.
That's kind of how I felt about it.
You'd be amazed, Sam. You'd be amazed.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So this actually brings up we talked a little bit about art as expression and art as devotion and art as a business. Let's talk about where those two or three pieces meet. Now this is something that I've had a conversation with Brian for at least over the course of like 6 weeks, and that's the taking a piece that you put your soul into and selling it as a commercial ware, and particularly like trying to find a home for it as opposed to trying to find a buyer for it. Is that a factor in your business ever? And when it is, how does that influence what you do with it?
For me, like, it is a factor because I mean the biggest pieces that I end up doing, I usually have a purpose in mind for them, because I hate to, the horn, the Uller horn, for example. I knew when I was doing that horn what the heck it was going to be for. I knew it was going to be that I was going to gift it basically to the feast itself, and it was always going to be used for the feast. But I wrestle a lot with, creating something that I really put that kind of time into, and really put that kind of, especially if it has a stronger spiritual significance or religious significance. I have a really tough time putting it out there and just being like, yeah, this is for sale. This is the price tag for it. You know what I mean? Joe Blow, whoever the hell you are, can have it as long as the money's there. That's a tough one for me, especially depending on what was behind the piece.
So this is one of those things that I find the more you trust to, I don't know, fate or weird, depending on where you're looking at it, is I always find the right person. I've never sold a painting to the wrong person. I mean, certainly prints go to a wide range of people, but in fact, a lot of times, this isn't heathen related, but it's still on topic. I'd done a cover for Hero Games for their Fantasy Hero Complete, and it was a redheaded conquistador female warrior defeating a red dragon. And I ended up selling it to a woman who sells her art at DragonCon every year, and is typically one of a very few number of females selling on the front row at DragonCon. And so when she saw the painting, she also has red hair, I should say. So when she saw the painting, she said, "Oh, you painted me owning DragonCon." And I said, "Yeah, that's what I painted." Even though it wasn't what I intended it for, the minute I saw her interpretation of it, I saw why it happened. And the same has happened, like I mentioned the tier piece earlier, it went to a very staunch tiersman who'd been following my work for a while, and for him it was kind of like, it's about damn time, even though we had no conversations, the piece wasn't commissioned by him, but it was for him. And there's only 2 pieces I've ever created that I haven't yet sent to market, and I may never send to market. One of them is the Odin piece that's on the banner behind me. It hangs in my house. I look at it and I do critique it. I'm like, I would have painted this differently, or I might have changed this here. I think any artist who looks at their work that's at least 6 months to a year old, and they begin to see everything they would have changed, but it just represents something for me that I'm not ready to let go of, and may never be. I don't know. The other is, I did a painting for my wife of Frigga to hang next to Odin, because I feel that if you're going to have Odin in your home, you should bring Frigga into your home as well. And so that hangs in my home as well. And those are the only 2 pieces I have of my own original art. We also collect original art, and I have paintings by a number of amazing illustrators, all of which, or most of which, also have a Norse theme. Yeah, I know. It just works out.
Well, that's cool.
So, I have a very important business question for the both of you. What's it going to take to get you guys to come out to Cascadia Moot next year?
What time of year is it?
May 20th through 22nd.
Impossible for me. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, that's Tennessee Ren Fair. I don't know. It might be possible for me. For me, what always gets me to a convention or any event is if people pay for my flight. I always go.
So right now, I mean, we're straight with you. Right now, we've got enough money to pay for the site, and we're working on the money to pay for the food.
But you heard the stretch goal.
Yeah.
You heard the stretch goal.
So I mean, I've been the artist guest at a lot of conventions, and typically the simple deal is, I mean, once some of them pay for your food, hotel, flight, all those sorts of things, and the less I have to worry about as a business person, the more I can look at, maybe a small event, but I've had small events that paid for everything that I actually made more at than things like DragonCon, where there's 90,000 people, and I got to clear $2,000 just to cover my costs of being there that weekend. So that's how I look at those things. But yeah, I mean, you guys want to talk to me, we'll talk after the fact, because I'd like to go for spiritual reasons as well. So I mean, that's a different conversation. Like the idea of hanging out with heathens and maybe doing a bloat or whatever is going on always interests me. So
Now, if you can't make it out in person for Cascadia Moot, we would be more than willing to accept an original piece that we can reproduce on T-shirts for exposure.
Nice.
We're all about the exposure here.
I don't know about that, but I'd be happy to let you guys see any of my existing art on a shirt for sure. And also could probably be convinced to send some prints to give away if there's any sort of contests or raffles or any of that sort of thing.
You guys
Yeah, for
heard
sure.
that constitutes a verbal contract.
Yeah, well, that's the other advantage. That's the other advantage of prints is I know exactly what my costs actually are, so it's very easy to pass out pieces of paper.
Hey, well, we do have at least one idea for a contest, so we'll talk to you after the show.
Cool.
That's one other thing I guess I would point out as well, or I'd mention, is if you guys decide to do like a charity raffle or something like that, then I'd be more than happy to do something, a carving for something like that, especially. Which, I mean, I don't know if you guys were thinking about it or not, but I totally recommend. It's the kind of thing I donate, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 horns a year to charity raffles all over the place. Some of them are run by, actually most of them are run by heathens in different communities doing good work, you know what I mean, helping out children's hospitals and stuff like that.
Hmm. We've had Josh Heath with the Open Halls Project on
Yeah.
before.
Just
on
what
the
I was
past.
thinking.
We've talked to him, and he's getting ready to do some really exciting things over the next couple of next 6 to 8 months. So I don't want to say anything. I don't, other than that, but you know.
We're working on stuff is the general gist of it. We
Yeah.
have plans.
This is another part of being an illustrator that basically all conversations are covered under I have an NDA.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you guys decide to move Cascadia Moot to June, then I will totally come out there. But if you guys do it in May,
Well, maybe next.
Unfortunately, the date is set for this year. It's when we have the site. So
I got you.
If
Well,
it's
I love that part of the world. I was
successful-
out there in September myself. Actually, I was in Tacoma, Washington, and I think it's amazing. So, excuse to go back there sounds good to me.
we'll make sure to send you pictures because it's one of the most beautiful spots on the wet side. So
Awesome.
So, that does bring us to our last, I guess, 15 minutes of the show. Wow, this went quick.
yeah. Well, there's a topic we didn't really touch on so much unless I just wasn't paying attention. Is art as a devotional act?
Go ahead and explain that a little bit for our listeners, since they
So-
can't read the show notes.
Right. So when you create your art, is there ever a point where the art itself is a devotional act, whether it be towards the gods or your ancestors or towards your local whites, where you are creating something as an act of worship?
Absolutely. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I mean the time involved and everything else. I mean it's. I mean, you're giving blood, sweat, and tears. You know, I mean, especially when you know what you're creating it for at the outset. I mean, the act itself is in fact devotion. Especially, I mean, I probably could be less torturous in the way that I create things sometimes, but I'm not sure that's even intentional. Maybe that's a little, I don't know, maybe that's a little hang up from previous lives, as it were. But no, the act of creation itself is absolutely an act of devotion in and of itself for me.
For me, it depends on the piece, but when I'm working on a piece of a god or goddess, I actually do. Sometimes I do it before the sketching phase. Sometimes I do it right after the sketching phase as I start to have an idea. I'll do a ritual offering and meditation to commune. I often get images in my head during those sessions about the way it should go or what's desired. And I often feel with those pieces that I have to do them rather than that I want to do them at a certain point. I know Brian feels that way as well once you get in, particularly on the mask, God mask horns. It's just like I've heard you talk about putting aside high-paying work in order to just get it done. And it is similar. I'm also doing a series now as well. I call them the Hodkin, but it's my house spirit paintings, where I've started doing smaller paintings because obviously not everybody can afford a $2,000 plus original for their home, and so I try to do them where I can paint them in 1 to 3 days and charge right around that $350 mark for them. And for those, I've been researching a lot of the stories of different spirits, house spirits from different Northern European cultures. But what I try to do is put them in a modern setting. So the first one I did is a little guy who's like sweeping someone's office desk, and it's very clearly a modern desk with computer implements and modern pencils and those sorts of things. I also did another one I call the Brownie, which is a little guy who's helping make brownies in the kitchen, and it's very clearly a modern oven with a digital timer in the background. And so I very much like the idea with these spirits is that I love the idea of the house white, and that house whites, even though they're rooted like so many things in the lore we have of old, but they're modern spirits who interact with families right now. And the idea of capturing that, it's just, I really like it. I think it's very fun. And to date, I've sold all 3 of them. So I actually, so far, I can't make those fast enough. I've not had any of them longer than a month at this point. And what I love about those is people see it and they go, oh my God, that goes in my kitchen, or that goes in my office. And they seem to get it. The other thing I love about the Hodkin series is that I sell a lot of them to Christian and agnostics so far as well, which just gives me great joy that the concept of house white transcends religion and actually enters into Western culture. It's such a part of, because that was the thing that held over, right? Like Christianity was able to root out the gods and especially the goddesses very easily, but the Tomte and the Nissen and the Gnome and the Brownie, they couldn't root out. I mean, there are sermons that tell you not to engage with those things way later. We're talking like 1500, even up until like 1800. And I have a friend who's Danish, and Tomten are still very much a big part of Christmas, and they call it Yule there, yet they're Lutheran, or Christian. So I love the idea of finding these little ways where you latch on to the culture of heathenry, but that is actually coming to realize that it's just our Western culture, and that not everybody notices it or understands it, but it hits them in a way where they just go, oh, that belongs in my house. And I even include on the back of each of these paintings, I created a chart called the care and feeding of your Hodkin, where I suggest that they make a small altar, and that every Thursday they give either beer, milk, and or porridge with a pat of butter on top every week. And if they're unable to do it every week, they at least do it on feast days or big gatherings of the family. And I love that I've created this little chart that's like codifying how to honor a spirit or a white, and that regular folks are like, oh, that's so cute. Let's do that. And so I don't know. I feel like it's my little like a little bit of paganizing modern culture.
Well, the God cult is the public cult, but it's really hard to root out the family cult.
Mm-hmm. True.
So I've got a follow-up question on this.
We do want to make this one relatively quick because we are getting into the final 10 minutes or so of the show.
Right. Well, we have some dead space to cut out. We'll be fine, Josh. The idea of ritual destruction of your pieces as an act of devotion. It's something that I know I've done, and it's a tradition that was passed down to me by the masters I studied under. Is that something that's ever been a thing with you guys as artists?
The first Feast of Uller that I hosted at my house in 2013, which we do it usually the first weekend or second weekend in December. For the painting, I did a hunting horn that was ritually destroyed. It was only ever sounded one time during as an offering to the god. It was sounded, and then that was it. It was destroyed after it was sounded. It was bogged, actually.
That's actually that was the same event that I publicly took my oath of heathenry as well.
But so I mean, I believe in, you know, I destruction is certainly a portion of it. I've never destroyed, as an act of devotion, I've never destroyed a big piece. That would hurt. That would hurt a lot. It was hard enough, you know, spending, you know, 200 hours on a horn, and then saying this horn, nobody's ever going to drink from this horn again unless it's at this specific, you know, this specific event for this specific thing. All the rest of the year, all the rest of the, you know, the life, it's hung up forever for just this one purpose. I mean, maybe that's, I don't know. I don't think it qualifies as destruction though.
I've never out and out destroyed a piece. I have a lot of pieces that have built up over time, and so I am toying with the idea of doing something I've seen other illustrators do, where they do a fire sale, where I'm going to list an amount of work and say, you know, you have a week to buy these paintings, or they're going in a fire, and like an actual fire sale, and we'll see what happens. But it's not devotional. It's not like I created the piece to be destroyed.
Right.
Imagine, you know, I dabble in art, and that's all it is just dabbling. But I imagine after pouring blood, sweat, and tears for hundreds of hours into a piece, destroying it would just tear you up inside.
So difficult.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Like I said, the one that I destroyed, I mean, it took me a little while, but it wasn't anything like that. I mean, it wasn't like one of the big God mask horns. That's weeks worth of work. That would be, shoo. Kind of makes me uncomfortable thinking about it, but maybe it should make me uncomfortable.
You know, it's not something I've even ever really thought that much about. I mean, all the pieces that it would tear me up, I think, to destroy sell so quickly that, in a way, that's kind of like a little death, because it's like, oh man, I kind of wanted to look at that again. Like, I didn't, like the paintings I've had for a while where it's like, oh, I hate that now. I'm like, oh, please buy it. But the others, I mean, so many of them, like the Tears piece, I had it for 3 weeks finished before the guy came and picked it up. The piece I mentioned selling to the artist at Dragon Con, I had finished it the week before Dragon Con when she purchased it. So I guess that's the closest it comes to letting go.
But now we've planted the idea in your head, and you're
I'm not thinking about it. I actually
make something amazing, and you're going to ritually destroy it.
I kind of like the idea, actually. But I think I don't know. I might be less precious with my work. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it gets to what is the purpose of the ritual destruction, and that's probably a different show.
Probably several shows, to be honest.
Yeah. Or maybe just a late night conversation around a fire, Toby.
Well, that's what Cascadia Moot's for.
As long as terrible Swedes don't start pouring akavit in my gullet way too early.
Akavit, and I believe Toby is in fact the reason why the rum is gone. But Levi might have had a little something to do with that.
That man is terrible.
There will be akavit, and we're hoping for at least 45 gallons of homebrew.
Nice one.
Basically, what we're saying is whether you're selling stuff or not, come to Cascadian.
They're making a strong case for it, man. They're making a strong case for it.
Oh, anyway. So we got about 7 minutes left. Do we have any further questions, guys?
I think I can ask this one in a way that makes sense. So, do you guys see yourselves as making heathen art, or a heathen who makes art?
Depends on the piece. I mean, when I was creating the piece for the temple, man, I don't know how I can describe it, but the idea that someone has taken my art and brought it either into their home or another sacred space, and that to them it represents divinity, is one of the greatest honors of my life, regardless of the particular sect or kindred that group belongs to, the idea that I made something that to them says divine, man, it's crazy, humbling and awe-inspiring to me. And so yeah, in those cases, I was very much creating heathen art. But I'm always heathen, even when I'm painting orcs and space marines.
I mean, the answer is probably similar. I mean, I don't know. I think I'm probably a heathen making heathen art. Most of the time, because I mean, most of what I do, most of the art that I make, or create, most of the stuff that I'm making, I mean, is heathen related. But I mean, the sheer fact that it's a drinking horn and horns play such a, I don't think a pivotal is not the right word, but pronounced role, perhaps in a functional role in heathenry. That affects it from the get-go, just because of what it is. But I mean, obviously I do stuff outside of that as well. But I mean, I like I said, I would say that I'm a heathen making heathen art most of the time. I mean, the actual art that I do, the things that are not just craft, it's a heathen making heathen art.
Well, and it comes across so much too when you see our various setups at these shows. I mean, you walk into Brian's space, and unless you just have never encountered heathenry before, you're like, oh yeah, this dude's heathen. Whereas with me, I mean, it very much depends on the show, and oftentimes people have been talking for me for a while, and then they say, oh, you've got a hammer around your neck. Are you heathen? Are you Asatru? And then we have that conversation. Or you have an awful lot of Norse mythology-based paintings. What's that about? So I think that's also one big difference between the space that Brian and I create when we're selling.
All right, so we've got 4 minutes left, and I want to give you guys the opportunity to tell our current listeners and the people who are going to download this podcast where they can go to find your stuff, how they can buy it,
where they can see you.
Yeah.
where they can see you, and when you're going to be at Cascadium it.
We're paying our guests with exposure.
But this actually is exposure, right?
That's the difference, right? Yeah, it's actually
Tens of people.
Yeah.
Well, 6 currently. 6 people.
So you can find my stuff at samflegal.com. Flegal is spelled F-L-E-G-A-L. I have a store there. I also post my convention schedule there if you want to see if I'm going to be at an event near your local area. Big events for me are Gen Con, which is a huge gaming convention in Indianapolis, and Dragon Con. And then I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, so I do a lot of events that are around that area.
For me, you can go, if you look up Where the Gods Live on the internet, it's going to lead back to me one way or the other. You can go to the Facebook page Where the Gods Live. You can go to the Etsy shop Where the Gods Live. And if you see a carved drinking horn somewhere on the Ren Fair circuit, 9 times out of 10 it's mine. I'm not a hard guy to find. But if you go to a fair somewhere, Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, if you go to SCA events, I do Gulf Wars. And then, of course, I do Bristol Ren Fair up in Kenosha, Wisconsin as well. But the schedule's ever expanding as well, so you never know where I might turn up.
So I have a quick question for Brian, because a lot of heathens don't have $800 to drop on a horn right away.
Sure.
Do you do, for instance, let's take me for example, if I wanted to buy a horn from you, would I be able to make payments towards the horn, and then once it's paid off, get it delivered to me?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the last Thor's Hammer that I did. That's exactly what's going on with that one right now. A gallery in North Carolina called Laughing Brook bought it from me, and they're paying it off in installments. So I'm totally fine with that.
Awesome.
And if anybody else listening to our podcast wants to know where to find these guys, we're definitely going to link them on our Facebook page.
And the links are in the YouTube description.
Heathentalk.com.
I also want to add real quick, if you're interested in getting into the nitty-gritty side of the illustration business, I do a web show called One Fantastic Week which we occasionally Heathenry comes up just because it's me, but it's a lot more about the ins and outs of the art world, if that side of things interests you.
All right. So in the last minute, I want to invite everybody to go to their websites, buy their stuff, send them an email, say thanks for being on the show, admire their work, and go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/heathentalk. Give us a like this video, and buy a t-shirt.
So basically, either give them your money or give us your money, or preferably give them and us your money.
That's the goal.
So I guess to wrap it up here, I just want to say, hey, Josh, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, but you're not the boss of me.
Have a good night, everybody.